Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Nolene Duff. I'm the Chair of the Panel of Administrators at the City of Casey, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our Council meeting of the 17th of August 2021. I'll start with introductions of my colleague panel members. Firstly, good afternoon, Mr. Miguel Belmar.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair.
And good afternoon, Mr. Cameron Boardman.
Afternoon, Chair. Afternoon, Mr. Belmar.
And our Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Glenn Patterson, is joining us this afternoon. We're also joined by a number of our senior staff, Ms. Jen Bednar, Director Customer and Business Transformation, Steve Colden, Director Community Life, James Collins, Director City Planning and Infrastructure, Holly de Kretzer, Director Corporate Services, and we're assisted this afternoon by our technicians, Simon Horsburgh, Jordan Barfoot, and our Governance Officer, Nicole Estrada. So I'll open the meeting with the statement of acknowledgement. The City of Casey proudly acknowledges the traditional owners, Casey's Aboriginal communities, and their rich culture, and pays respect to their elders past, present and future. We acknowledge Aboriginal people as Australia's first peoples and as the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we work and live. The diversity statement. The City of Casey is home to a remarkable diversity with many cultures, languages, faiths and communities of worship, ages, LGBTQI+ identities and landscapes, together forming our rich and dynamic community history. From our first Australians to our most recent arrivals and every wave between, the City of Casey welcomes and represents all community members and their respective ambitions to live healthy, rewarding and happy lives. We recognise this diversity as our strength and we aim to share, nurture and celebrate it. We'll move to item 2, the confirmation of minutes. Do I have a mover and a seconder to confirm the minutes of the council meeting held on the 20th of July 2021?
I'll move those.
Thank you, Mr. Belmar. Seconder?
A second, Chair.
Mr. Boardman, all in favour? Carried. Item 3, declaration of interests. I've considered my obligations under Section 130 of the Local Government Act 2020, and I don't have any conflict of interest relevant to the agenda papers to declare. I also note no officers have declared any conflicts. Do my colleague administrators have any conflicts to declare?
Nothing to declare from me, Chair.
Thank you.
And nothing to declare, Chair.
Thank you. We move to item 4, public question time, and this afternoon we have received 2 public questions. The first question is from Kimberly Batson, and the subject matter is Federal Election Advocacy Agenda. And Ms. Batson's question is, when will the Federal Election Advocacy Agenda for the City of Casey be publicly available? I can advise Ms. Batson as follows, that in preparation for the announcement of a federal election, planning for Council's Federal Election Advocacy campaign is underway. As part of this work, Council recently launched its new advocacy identity known as Connecting Casey, which you'll find on our website, which was developed using feedback from more than 600 community members. Connecting Casey will frame Council's federal advocacy activity. Council's Connecting Casey Facebook page is up and running. We've started to share advocacy information on this page for followers and for our community. The Facebook page will be used throughout the campaign to promote Council's advocacy priorities and opportunities for the community to get involved. Council recently undertook community consultation to gather insights on community pain points in order to determine Council's key advocacy priorities for the federal election. Again, more than 600 community members participated in the survey, and Council will be reporting back to the community on the results of this engagement towards the end of August via its Facebook page and on Casey Conversations. Using the aforementioned community feedback and Council's strategic planning community insights, a short list of key federal campaign priorities and regional initiatives have been prepared that will underpin the Connecting Casey campaign and will be used to secure commitments in the lead up to the election from both sides of politics. Details about these priorities will be shared in September, and we encourage you to follow Council's advocacy activity via the Connecting Casey Facebook page. Thank you, Ms Batson, for your question. The second question this afternoon is from Darren English, and the subject matter is plan to ban home fires in the City of Casey. And Mr English's question is as follows. Evidence is mounting that home wood fires are a source of poor health outcomes and even death. I know that in my area in Berwick, home fires start in autumn and finish at the end of spring. I'm unable to open a window during these seasons because someone will have a fire going and the smoke wafts around my street. I would ask that the City of Casey put forward a plan to ban the use of home fires for the betterment of the environment and general health outcomes. And Mr English has provided a link to an Age article. In response to Mr English's question, I'm advised by officers as follows. That wood heaters are a permitted method of heating in Victoria. The policy approach in Victoria has and continues to be focused on regulation of wood heaters at the point of manufacture, with new units required to meet the relevant Australian standards. Education is also used with the aim to improve operating practices, for example, the development and provision of best practice guidance information, which is available on the EPA website. The EPA Waste Management Policy on solid fuel heating was amended in October 2018 to incorporate efficiency standards that relate to the manufacture of all new wood heaters. As part of the consultation process, it was acknowledged that wood smoke impacts were of concern to the Victorian community. At the time, a Victorian air quality strategy was proposed to be developed, and that this document would provide an opportunity to address wood heater impacts. The strategy is not yet finalised by the Victorian government. The City of Casey does not have any plans to introduce a ban on wood heaters within the municipality at this stage. Members of the community that have concerns about excessive amounts of smoke coming from a neighbour's wood heater can lodge a report with council, and a council environmental health officer will investigate the report and assess whether the person is operating the unit in accordance with best practice guidelines. Thank you once again, Mr English, for your question. I now move to item 5, officer reports, and we have 3 officer reports this afternoon. The first of those is the Audit and Risk Committee report. And it is my pleasure to welcome Mr John Nguyen, who is the Chair of the Audit and Risk Committee at the City of Casey. Mr Nguyen is going to speak to the work that's been undertaken by the Audit and Risk Committee over the last several months, and then we'll have the opportunity to ask Mr Nguyen any questions, and then we'll move to the report. So good afternoon, Mr Nguyen, and I invite you to speak to your report.
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased to present to you my annual report of the Audit and Risk Committee. And the report is required to be delivered in accordance with Section 54(4) of the Local Government Act. And essentially, the report outlines the activities of the committee over the last 6 months. I note that over the last 6 months, the committee have met on 2 occasions, both of the occasions remotely due to the COVID restrictions. And during those meetings, the committee talked about a number of things, including presentation of reports from both the external and internal auditors. So during the 6 months, we received 2 reports from the external auditors and 5 reports from the internal auditors. And those reports essentially provide an outline for the activities that both external and internal audit have undertaken during that time. The external audit report was essentially provided by Vargo and another provider. And internal reports essentially looked at activities covering rates, revenue, open space, assets, procurement, project management framework, and landfill and waste management. The committee is expected to meet in about 2 weeks' time, during which time we'll be considering the financial report for Casey for the 2021 financial year. So with that, Chair, I might just leave the report and I'll take it as read, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Mr. Nguyen. I will invite questions from the panel, but perhaps if I can just open, and I'd be interested in your view on the quality and content of financial reports that are tabled for review by the Audit and Risk Committee, and whether or not there are any suggestions for improvement that you would make to us.
Okay, thank you for that, Chair. I think the first thing to note is that the City of Casey is actually a complex organisation. It undertakes a lot of activities ranging from gardening, maintenance, providing childcare support, providing waste recycling management. So when I think about Casey, I think about a very complex business. So the financial information that has been tabled at the Audit Committee has been of a high standard. What I always ask myself in these meetings is there anything else that could be presented that would add to the decision making, that would identify risk and other potential issues that may arise in the future? Noting that financial reports are generally historical information, sometimes it's hard to see what may happen in the future. But that, I think, is not a bad thing, because it gives an opportunity for officers of council to provide their views on the financial position. So in direct response to your question, Chair, the financial reports that I've seen and that's been tabled at the Audit Committee has been of a high standard.
Thank you, Mr. Nguyen. Are there any other questions, Mr. Belmar, Mr. Boardman?
Yes, Chair. I have a couple of questions, if I may ask my first question. Mr. Nguyen, you mentioned that you're working with internal and external auditors. Are there any issues which the internal auditors have identified which have required that your committee seek further information or further investigation, or in any way require more assistance from council?
Okay, thank you for a question, Mr. Boardman. Internal audit, because of the work that they do, always come up with recommendations and also observations as part of their work, and that's why we have internal audit, to get them to examine a particular subject and to report back with their findings. So, as I noted, internal audit delivered 5 reports during the period, and offered recommendations and findings in each of those reports. And they range from not necessarily major issues, but issues that are of low risk and also medium risk. I can't recall any high risk matters that internal audit have raised. But I think if I were to look back at the reports, the one report which required additional probing from the Audit Committee is the report on procurement. And procurement is complex because Casey, like all other council, engage a whole bunch of contractors to deliver services. So internal audit raised a number of issues to help to improve the procurement and contracting process, one of which I recall is a suggestion to potentially adopt a more electronic format for recording procurement and contract management. I think it's probably fair to say that the issue that Casey is seeing is not unique to local councils. A lot of local councils undertake procurement activities on not fully automated process, and that inevitably leads to some information not being recorded. So one of the recommendations that internal audit made was to consider the cost benefit of implementing a more robust electronic way to record procurement and contracts.
Any further questions?
Yes, Chair, through you, I have a further question from Mr. Nguyen. Now, Mr. Nguyen, your committee is, of course, both an audit and a risk committee. And what I wanted to ask you was, are there any specific risk issues which your committee has identified, which are of particular note and require further consideration by Council?
Sure. So thank you for the question. It's probably fair to say that the waste management recycling landscape is evolving, and what I mean by that is legislation and regulations are changing in terms of the way councils are required to manage their waste and recycling, and that's compounded by some of the external environment of recycling products not being able to go overseas for recycling. So I think recycling and waste has some way to go in terms of where we're going to land on that, but I see that as a risk area that Casey should continue to pay attention on. Internal Audit made a number of recommendations, a lot of which identify the challenges that I've just raised. This is a fast evolving situation. Council spent a lot of money to manage waste and recycling. Whilst it has a strategy in place, one of the recommendations was to make sure that the strategy continues to be updated to reflect the changing environment. There needs to be more reporting so that council executives and the administrators have a full set of information in terms of making decisions. It's probably also fair to say that landfill space in Victoria is becoming a premium. And what that means is that the cost of disposing waste is going to increase in coming years, and council needs to make sure that it has a proper strategy to manage that, because that cost, if not considered properly, could be very high in coming years. It's similar to other recommendations that Internal Audit made. It's important to just keep abreast of what's going on in the landscape, making sure that information is presented in a quick and orderly way. Another recommendation that was made is that Casey manage or outsource some of the recycling process to service providers, and there's not a clear, I suppose, monitoring of performance of the service providers. So I think it's good to make sure that more robust performance monitoring processes in place to make sure that waste management and recycling firms that are providing services to Casey are performing to contract to standard. So there's a few more recommendations that were made, but I think waste management and recycling I see as being a risk that's going to be continually needs to be managed by council in coming months and years.
Thank you. Any further questions? Well, thank you, Mr. Nguyen. We appreciate your insights and your expertise. So thank you for presenting to us today. I also want to note that Mr. Boardman is the panel's representative on the Audit and Risk Committee, and we thank you for your work, Mr. Boardman. I'll now move to the item 5.1, the Audit and Risk Committee report, and I'll seek a mover and a seconder.
Well, thank you, Chair, for your acknowledgement of my membership, and I guess it's appropriate that I move the report in that regard.
Thank you, Mr. Boardman, and a seconder.
Yes, I'll second that.
Mr. Belmar and Mr. Boardman, I invite you to speak to your motion.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would like to add some comments to Mr. Nguyen, and particularly thank Mr. Nguyen for accepting the role of Chair and presenting such a professional and thorough report this afternoon, and for the work that he has done over a number of months now, and also acknowledge our co-committee members, Carol Pagnon and Ernest Stavick, as independent members. And whilst it has been something which Mr. Nguyen's identified has only been 2 meetings this year, on the 23rd of February and the 29th of June, with a further 3 meetings to be held later this year, that really doesn't give justice to the amount of work that the committee has actually done by reviewing an extensive internal audit agenda, in addition to receiving significant updates on operational strategic matters from the organisation. That's allowed the committee to plot a comprehensive forward plan, not just consistent with our obligations under the Local Government Act, but also ensure that we are adding the right level of expertise, oversight and governance contribution to the organisation as a whole. And with each of the 5 internal audits, of which Mr. Nguyen has mentioned, already procurement, tendering, contract management and landfill waste management being 2 particular reports, they're linked, of course, where there's been a number of recommendations made around how council can continue to adopt a best practice framework to ensure we're meeting all our obligations from a contractual management, but ensuring that we are providing a best value framework to ratepayers. We've also looked at, I should say the internal auditors have also looked at where there's been analysis and consideration by the committee in regards to the models we're using around rates revenue, which includes a data interrogation exercise. We've looked at best utilisation of open space assets, including parks and gardens, and also the broader project management framework on how we are plotting and managing our overall framework to meet all of our corporate, commercial and statutory obligations. It's worthwhile to reflect just very briefly on the charter that was adopted, which was a new charter that was adopted at the 23rd of February meeting around what our obligations are. And it states quite clearly that the committee does have an obligation to monitor the compliance of council policies and procedures with the overarching governance principles, to monitor the council's financial performance reporting, to monitor and provide advice on risk management, fraud prevention systems and controls, and overseas internal and external audit functions. And those that are reading the council papers and certainly the audit risk papers would reflect upon what Mr. Nguyen has identified. This is not simply a passive exercise. There is an ongoing requirement to not just take on board what the council officers are presenting in conjunction with what the internal auditors are presenting, and to align that to the external audit framework, but the committee members to monitor the implementation of those recommendations to ensure there is a culture of high performance and adhering to the comparative analysis that the internal audit and the committee members themselves make to this process, to ensure that all of the governance principles and the evolution of the organisation under a best practice framework are adhered to. And all members of the committee under Mr. Nguyen's leadership is adhering to that. And I think that because of that, we are adding real value to the organisation as a whole. We would be aware as a council that there is a significant forward agenda of transformative activities, including some significant strategic decisions that we need to make, all of which again have in an advisory and in an adherence and a risk monitoring basis an oversight by the committee itself. The committee is well prepared and experienced for that challenge. It is one that will certainly be relied upon by us as council when we make those decisions, and I extend that to the organisation as a whole to ensure that right level of oversight, contribution and input is being valued and acknowledged throughout the entire organisation. So the biannual report, whilst it is a statutory obligation, it does provide a health check that we can have confidence that not only are we meeting all of our obligations statutory, but where there are those process improvement requirements as identified primarily through the internal auditors, but by added value by the committee itself, and certainly by Mr. Nguyen and Ms. Pagnon and Mr. Stabic, is a vital part of what the reform or future ongoing and consistent reform of Casey is about. I'm very pleased to be a member. I thank you personally, John, for your input and contribution to professionalism in this exercise. I think from my colleagues' perspective, we really look forward to further working with you as we further reform some of the key strategic aspects of the organisation in the near future. So with those comments, Chair, I'm happy to adopt what has been a thorough, robust, comprehensive process over many months now.
Thank you, Mr. Boardman. Mr. Belmar.
Thank you, Chair. In seconding, I just want to reflect on the excellent work that's been done by the members of the committee, Mr. Nguyen, Ms. Pagnon, Mr. Stabeck and Mr. Boardman, my fellow administrator, and note that good corporate governance requires individuals who are willing to come forward and do this important work. The work of the committee is essential to the proper, transparent and effective governance of the City of Casey. I commend the report, and I commend to the community that attached to the papers tonight are the minutes of the previous meetings of this committee. They show that the work that is being done by the committee, the great depth of work that's being done. And I note as well tonight that Mr. Nguyen, in his presentation and his answers to the questions that we presented, has identified that the work continues, and he's identified a particular risk that his committee will continue to properly address in the good governance of the City of Casey. And so for those reasons, and noting that the committee is functioning under policies that were adopted by this council in the previous 12 months, I commend the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Belmar. I'll put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. And thank you once again, Mr. Nguyen, for joining us this afternoon. I'll move on to item 5.2, which is Section 11A, Instrument of Authorisation, Planning and Environment Act. Do I have a mover for the recommendation? Thank you, Mr. Belmar. And a seconder? Mr. Boardman. Mr. Belmar, I invite you to address the motion.
Thank you, Chair. This is a somewhat of a technical motion that comes to the full council from time to time, but it is an important and fundamental role that we play in ensuring that at all times the appropriate council officers have the correct delegations under instruments and under Planning and Environment Acts to ensure that at all times council decisions are made in accordance with law. I reviewed the documents and I commend the motion and thank the council officers who undertake this important work. It's highly technical work. It needs to be done very carefully. If it's not, it can create difficulties in the future. But I am confident that, as has occurred on previous occasions when I've been a member of this council meeting, that it is being done correctly and appropriately. With those comments, I commend the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Belmar. Mr. Boardman, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Chair. If I could echo Mr. Belmar's comments in acknowledging the staff, both existing and new, who are subject to the instrument of delegations and the professional and technical activities that they perform on behalf of the municipality. We are aware that being a substantial growth council, that work is only increasing. In a traditional growth sense, but also in potentially an infill sense, which is an additional challenge for the organisation, but it also requires the right mix of skills and adherence to all of the requirements on the Planning Environment Act and other statutory frameworks, and to ensure that we have the right skills and the balance, as you acknowledged by the instrument of delegation, positions the council for further success, and it's important that we acknowledge the contribution from all of those who are involved in performing a vital task on behalf of the organisation. So I echo Mr. Belmar's words and thank them all individually and collectively.
Thank you, Mr. Boardman. I'll put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Item 5.3, Amendment C269, Minter Farm Infrastructure Contributions Plan. Do I have a mover for the recommendation?
Yes, I'll move that.
Thank you, Mr. Belmar. And a seconder?
Second, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Boardman. Mr. Belmar.
Thank you, Chair. This is another motion, which a little like the previous one, is somewhat technical in the work that council is doing tonight, but ultimately it's a fundamentally important motion, because what we are doing tonight is we are acknowledging that on the 24th of June 2021, Amendment C29 case and C282 case to the Casey Planning Scheme were gazetted by the state government. These gazettals have introduced amendments to the Minter Farm Precinct Structure Plan and have also allowed the implementation of the final Minter Farm Infrastructure Contribution Plan. I won't go into the acronyms, but ultimately what we're doing tonight is ensuring that by passing this motion this evening, we will ensure that the Minter Farm North-South alignment, which will extend from Grice's Road in the south to O'Shea Road in the north, is an extension of a road which is currently underway by the state government, but we're ensuring that a road will be delivered to ensure that at the appropriate time and in the appropriate chronology with land release, that roads are built and provided at a time when they will be required by the community. And we're passing this motion tonight at a time to ensure that the developers are able to continue to provide their services, and that road construction can continue at the appropriate time to meet those releases. Now, attached to the documents tonight is a road alignment for that north-south alignment that I've described. I've considered that. I've also considered a confidential attachment to the council papers tonight, which describe that a public acquisition overlay is being used for to provide this alignment. A PAO, a public acquisition overlay, is a planning tool which can be used by which private land is acquired for the provision of a service. On this occasion, it's being used for the provision of this road. It's appropriate that it occur in this way. I've considered those documents and have am comfortable and satisfied with the information contained in the documents. And for those reasons, and for the fact that I am satisfied that the council officers are working at an appropriate time to ensure that there is no delay in the implementation of this PAO, that it's absolutely appropriate that this motion be passed tonight, and there not be any further delay in the implementation of these two gazettals which occurred only in June this year. And so for those reasons, I commend the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Belmar. Mr. Boardman.
Thank you, Chair. It is, as Mr. Belmar has outlined, time sensitive. We have as a council discussed the Minter Farm development extensively and acknowledge that it is a very significant development in the north of the Casey municipality. It should be noted that, particularly in regards to the Amendment C269 case, that the proposed north-south arterial, which is subject to this resolution, is the development of an arterial road, or essentially an extension of Alato Road, which will provide an important transport connection between Grice's Road in the south and O'Shea's Road in the north. But one of the key requirements around the amendment was that there was an original cap, as I understand it, 1,000 residential lots in the precinct until the delivery or the ministerial approval of this particular amendment. Now that the minister has signed off on the amendment, we understand that that will free up an alternative north-south route, but it will also allow for further development in the north of the Minter Farm precinct beyond the lot cap, to look at other development potential, which also includes employment and economic potential beyond residential development. So it's an important amendment that provides an alternative impetus for the precinct as a whole, to look at alternative utilisations, particularly as it relates to potentially job opportunities, which are necessary, and particularly in that part of the municipality. So whilst we welcome the ministerial approval, we also note, as Mr. Belmar has, that there is those time requirements. The information that's been provided by the council officer certainly gives us confidence that we are able to meet the requirements of the precinct plan, and ensure that all of the parcels of land identified within the Minter Farm ICP do meet their objectives, that the transport linkages and connectivity are improved upon, and do provide that impetus for further development in the north of the precinct itself. So adding to Mr. Belmar's comments, I'm pleased to second the resolution and acknowledge that, that there is a lot of work that has been completed in this regard and a lot more that will continue to be completed.
Thank you, Mr. Boardman. I'll put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Thank you. That's the conclusion of officer reports this afternoon. Move to item 6, consideration of reports of committees. And I simply note the record of discussion as listed in the agenda papers. Item 7 is petitions. There were no petitions tabled for consideration at this meeting today. Item 8, urgent business. There are no matters of urgent business. Closed council, item 9. There are no closed council items. So that leaves me with item 10, whereby I declare the open council meeting closed and thank members of the public for joining us on this live stream this afternoon. Once again, thank Mr. Nguyen for his presentation and to the officers for their work behind the scenes. I bid you all good afternoon. Thank you.